The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Hangar 7 at Fort Meridian, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Rachel Torres knelt beside the massive landing gear of a transport aircraft. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, though several rebellious strands had escaped to frame her oil-stained face. The coveralls she wore were standard issue, faded blue with her name stitched above the left breast pocket in plain black letters. But it was what lay beneath the fabric on her back that drew unwanted attention from her fellow service members. Rachel had been working as an aircraft mechanic at the base for 8 months now, transferred in from a smaller installation in Nevada where her skills with aircraft engines had earned her respect, if not friendship. Here at Fort Meridian, things were different. The base was larger, busier, and filled with younger recruits who seemed more interested in proving themselves through mockery than through competence. The tattoo on her back had been a source of whispered conversations and pointed stares since her first week. It stretched from her left shoulder blade down to the middle of her back, an intricate design that most people assumed was purely decorative. The pattern consisted of interlocking geometric shapes surrounding a central emblem that looked like a stylized compass rose, with smaller symbols radiating outward like satellites around a planet. The artwork was incredibly detailed, done in black ink with subtle shading that gave it an almost three-dimensional quality. To the untrained eye, it was simply an elaborate piece of body art, the kind of thing someone might get to look tough or mysterious. "Hey, Torres," called out Corporal Jake Martinez as he approached with 2 other young mechanics in tow. Martinez was barely 22, with the kind of swagger that came from never having been tested by anything more dangerous than a training exercise. His friends, Specialists David Carson and Kyle Webb, flanked him like loyal followers, always ready to laugh at his jokes and amplify his attitude. "You getting ready for another day of pretending to be a real mechanic?" Rachel didn't look up from the hydraulic system she was inspecting. She had learned early in her military career that responding to provocations usually made them worse, not better. Instead, she continued methodically checking the pressure readings on her gauge, making notes on her clipboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this routine hundreds of times before. The mockery had started small sideways glances, whispered comments when they thought she couldn't hear. But over the past few weeks, it had grown bolder. Martinez and his crew seemed to take particular pleasure in questioning her competence. Despite the fact that her work record was flawless and her repairs always held up under the most demanding conditions. "I'm talking to you, grease monkey," Martinez pressed, moving closer until he was standing directly behind her. The proximity made Rachel's skin crawl, but she maintained her professional composure, focusing on the task at hand rather than the growing tension in the room. Carson, a thin kid from Ohio with nervous energy, decided to join in. "Maybe she can't hear you over the sound of her own incompetence," he said, his voice cracking slightly as it often did when he tried to sound tough. The joke fell flat, but Webb dutifully chuckled anyway. It was Webb who decided to escalate things. He was the kind of person who always pushed situations just a little too far, unable to read social cues or recognize when enough was enough. "You know what I think," he said, his voice taking on a more malicious tone. "I think someone's trying way too hard to look badass with that ridiculous tattoo." Rachel's hand tightened slightly on her wrench, but she continued working. She had dealt with worse than this, much worse. And she wasn't about to let 3 kids fresh out of basic training get under her skin. Seriously, what is that thing supposed to be? Martinez leaned in closer, trying to get a better look at the design visible above the collar of Rachel's coveralls. "Looks like something you'd see in a comic book or a video game. Very intimidating," he added with exaggerated sarcasm. Carson, emboldened by the laughter from his companions, decided to contribute his own observation. "My sister has a butterfly tattoo that's probably more meaningful than whatever fantasy novel that thing came from. The three young men continued their commentary, their voices growing louder and more animated as they fed off each other's energy. Other mechanics in the hangar began to take notice, some looking uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Others simply grateful that they weren't the target of the harassment. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly understand, was that every symbol in Rachel's tattoo had been earned through blood, sweat, and actions that would never appear in any official military record. The geometric patterns they dismissed as decorative represented successful completion of missions in hostile territory. The central compass rose marked her graduation from an advanced reconnaissance program that didn't officially exist. And the smaller symbols surrounding it told a story of operations so classified that even discussing them could result in federal prosecution. But Rachel kept that knowledge to herself, as she had been trained to do. Her previous assignments were buried so deep in classified files that most people with top-secret clearance would never see them. She had transitioned to aircraft maintenance as part of a carefully planned exit strategy, allowing her to continue serving while her more dangerous work faded into official non-existence. As the morning progressed, the harassment continued sporadically. Martinez and his crew would approach Rachel's work area, make their comments, then move on to other tasks, always returning later for another round of mockery. It was a pattern Rachel recognized from previous assignments, the kind of persistent, but relatively mild harassment designed to wear down her resolve over time rather than create a single dramatic confrontation. Staff Sergeant Patricia Gonzalez, the hangar's senior non-commissioned officer, clearly disapproved of the behavior, but was hesitant to intervene directly. Military workplace dynamics were complex, and she understood that heavy-handed responses sometimes made situations worse rather than better. Instead, she made sure to include Rachel in normal work-related conversations throughout the day, asking technical questions and seeking her input on various mechanical issues. The small gesture meant more to Rachel than Gonzalez probably realized. It helped counterbalance the negativity coming from Martinez and his followers, reminding her that not everyone in the hangar had written her off as an easy target. As the afternoon wore on, Rachel found herself working on one of the more complex repairs scheduled for the day. The aircraft's port engine had been experiencing intermittent power fluctuations during recent test flights, and the diagnostic equipment had been unable to pinpoint the exact cause of the problem. This was the kind of challenging work that Rachel truly enjoyed, the type of puzzle that required both technical knowledge and intuitive understanding of how aircraft systems functioned. Under stress, she had removed several access panels and was deep inside the engine compartment when she heard footsteps approaching behind her. Without looking, she assumed it was one of her tormentors returning for another round of commentary, but the measured pace and deliberate cadence suggested someone older, more serious. Find anything interesting in their specialist? The voice belonged to someone Rachel didn't recognize, a deeper tone with the kind of authority that came from years of command. Experience. Rachel backed out of the engine compartment and turned to face the speaker, immediately recognizing the silver eagles on his collar that marked him as a full colonel. The man appeared to be in his late 50s, with graying hair cut in a precise military style and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings with calculating efficiency. His uniform was immaculate, creased and pressed to perfection, but there was something about his bearing that suggested this wasn't someone who had spent his career behind a desk. "Sir," Rachel said, coming to attention and offering a crisp salute. "I'm investigating an intermittent power loss issue in the port engine. The diagnostic readings suggest a possible fuel delivery problem, but I haven't been able to isolate the specific component yet." The colonel returned her salute and moved closer to examine her work area. "Colonel Marcus Kane," he said by way of introduction. "I'm here for the monthly readiness inspection. Mind if I take a look at what you've discovered so far? Rachel was struck by the colonel's approach. Most senior officers conducting inspections were more interested in checking boxes and maintaining schedules than in diving into the technical details of ongoing repairs. Kane, however, seemed genuinely interested in the work itself, asking informed questions about her diagnostic process and offering occasional insights based on his own experience with aircraft systems. As they discussed the engine problem, Rachel found herself relaxing slightly. Kane treated her as a competent professional rather than a subordinate to be lectured, and his questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of aircraft mechanics that was rare among senior officers. She began to suspect that this man had spent considerable time around aircraft in operational settings, rather than just studying them in classrooms or briefing rooms. But what Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Colonel Kane's interest in her went far beyond routine inspection procedures. He had recognized something in her tattoo that had stopped him cold, something that connected directly to his own carefully hidden past. And in the next few minutes, that recognition would change everything. As Rachel adjusted her position to access a different part of the engine compartment, her coveralls shifted slightly, revealing more of the intricate tattoo on her back. She was focused on the technical problem at hand, completely unaware of Colonel Kane's reaction to what he saw. Kane's weathered eyes locked onto the design with laser-like intensity. His breath caught almost imperceptibly as he recognized symbols that he hadn't seen in over a decade, symbols that were supposed to exist only in the memories of a very select few. The stylized compass rose at the center of Rachel's tattoo was identical to one hidden beneath his own uniform sleeve. Though his was older, the lines slightly faded by time and weather. Martinez, who had been watching the interaction between Rachel and the colonel with growing concern about the positive attention she was receiving, decided this was the perfect opportunity to share his opinions about Rachel's tattoo with a senior officer. He approached the two of them with what he probably thought was a respectful demeanor, though his underlying motivations were transparent to anyone with experience reading human behavior. "Excuse me, sir," Martinez said, offering a salute that was technically correct but lacking in genuine respect. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but some of us have been concerned about the appropriateness of certain personal decorations in the workplace." Kane turned to face Martinez with an expression that could have frozen water. His eyes, which had been warm and engaged during his technical discussion with Rachel, now held the kind of cold intensity that suggested a man accustomed to dealing with far more serious threats than petty workplace harassment. "Explain yourself, Corporal," Kane said, his voice carrying undertones that made it clear this was not a casual conversation. Martinez, either oblivious to the danger he was walking into or too committed to his course of action to change direction, pressed forward with his complaint. "Well, sir, it's just that Specialist Torres has this large tattoo that seems more appropriate for a comic book than a military installation. Some of us feel it undermines the professional atmosphere we're trying to maintain here." Rachel continued working on the engine, trying to appear absorbed in her task, while acutely aware of the conversation taking place just a few feet away. She had been through similar situations before, where authority figures had been influenced by complaints about her appearance or behavior, and she had learned that trying to defend herself usually made things worse. Kane stepped closer to Martinez, his presence somehow becoming more imposing despite no change in his physical posture. "And what exactly do you know about Specialist Torres's tattoo, Corporal?" The question caught Martinez off guard. He had expected the colonel to either dismiss his concerns or launch into a lecture about appropriate military appearance standards. Instead, Kane seemed to be asking for specific information about the tattoo itself, as if its design and meaning were relevant to the conversation. "Well, sir, it's just some kind of decorative pattern," Martinez said, his confidence beginning to waver. "Looks like something from a fantasy movie or comic book. Not really appropriate for someone representing the United States military." Kane's expression grew even colder. "I see. And you've made this assessment based on your extensive knowledge of military symbolism and operational insignia." Martinez was beginning to realize that this conversation wasn't going the way he had planned. "Sir, I just think that professional standards should apply to everyone equally." "Professional standards," Kane repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Tell me, Corporal, what do you know about classified operations? About units that operate outside normal military structures? About missions that don't officially exist?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge. Martinez looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable, clearly unsure where this line of inquiry was leading. Carson and Webb, who had been watching from a safe distance, began to edge closer, drawn by curiosity despite their growing sense that something significant was happening. Rachel felt her heart rate increase as she recognized the direction of Kane's questions. Very few people knew what her tattoo actually represented, and even fewer would be able to recognize its significance just by looking at it. The fact that Kane was asking these specific questions suggested that he might be one of the rare individuals who understood what they were looking at. The hangar had grown quieter as other mechanics became aware that something unusual was happening. Conversations died away as people turned their attention to the small group gathered around the aircraft. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez moved closer, her expression serious but supportive, sensing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond a routine inspection or disciplinary action. Kane turned his attention back to Rachel, who was still working inside the engine compartment, but clearly listening to every word of the conversation. "Specialist Torres, would you mind stepping out here for a moment?" Rachel complied immediately, backing out of the engine compartment and standing at attention. As she did so, more of her tattoo became visible, the intricate pattern clearly displayed above the collar of her coveralls. Kane studied the design with intense focus, his eyes tracing the various symbols and geometric shapes that comprised the overall pattern. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, with everyone in the hangar aware that they were witnessing something significant, even if they didn't understand what it was. Then, slowly and deliberately, Kane began rolling up the sleeve of his uniform shirt, revealing his own forearm. As the fabric moved higher, a tattoo became visible on Kane's arm, and Rachel felt her breath catch in her throat. The design on Kane's forearm was identical to the central portion of Rachel's tattoo. The same stylized compass rose, the same geometric pattern surrounding it, the same subtle shading that gave the ink a three-dimensional quality. But Kane's tattoo was older, the lines slightly faded and the edges softened by time and weather. The recognition was instantaneous and mutual. Rachel's eyes widened as she took in the significance of what she was seeing, while Kane's expression shifted from cold authority to something approaching respect and understanding. The two of them stood there for a moment, connected by a shared knowledge that excluded everyone else in the hangar. Then Kane did something that shocked everyone present. He covered his tattoo by pulling his sleeve back down, came to attention, and offered Rachel a crisp, formal salute. The gesture was unprecedented. A full colonel saluting a specialist was virtually unheard of outside of very specific ceremonial contexts, and certainly not something that would happen during a routine inspection in a maintenance hangar. The action carried implications that went far beyond simple military courtesy, suggesting a level of respect and recognition that transcended normal rank structures. Rachel, after a moment of stunned surprise, returned the salute with equal precision. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like much longer to everyone watching. The silence in the hangar was absolute, broken only by the distant sounds of aircraft operations on the flight line outside. Martinez stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. His complaints about Rachel's tattoo suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially dangerous, though he still didn't understand why. Carson and Webb had similar expressions of confusion and growing concern, beginning to realize that they had seriously misjudged the situation. The revelation that was about to unfold would not only silence the mockery once and for all, but would force everyone in that hangar to confront the reality that they had been in the presence of someone whose service to their country went far, deeper than any of them had imagined. Kane turned back to Martinez with the same cold expression he had worn earlier. But now there was an additional edge to his demeanor that suggested barely controlled anger. The colonel's revelation of his own tattoo had created a charged atmosphere in the hangar, and everyone present seemed to sense that they were about to witness something unprecedented. "Corporal Martinez, isn't it?" Kane said, though it was clear he already knew the answer. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made junior enlisted personnel instinctively straighten their posture. "Yes, sir," Martinez managed to say, his voice noticeably smaller than it had been earlier. "Tell me, Corporal, what do you know about the shadow companies?" Kane asked the question casually, as if inquiring about the weather, but Rachel felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of that particular name. The shadow companies were units that didn't appear on any official organizational charts, soldiers who undertook missions that the government couldn't officially acknowledge, operations that would be disavowed by the Pentagon and denied by the White House if they were ever discovered. Martinez looked blank. "Sir, I'm not familiar with that term." "No, I don't imagine you would be," Kane said. "They're units that don't appear on any official organizational charts. Soldiers who undertake missions that the government can't officially acknowledge, operations that, if they were ever discovered, would be disavowed by the Pentagon and denied by the White House." The explanation was delivered in the same conversational tone, but everyone in the hangar could sense the weight behind the words. Kane wasn't just sharing interesting military trivia. He was revealing information that very few people were authorized to know. "The members of these units," Kane continued, "are identified by specific tattoos designs that look like decorative artwork to most observers, but carry very specific meanings to those who know how to read them. These tattoos serve as recognition signals, ways for operators to identify each other in situations where normal military identification might be compromised or unavailable." Rachel remained at attention throughout this explanation, but internally she was reeling. Kane wasn't just recognizing her tattoo. He was revealing classified information about the entire program in front of a group of junior enlisted personnel. This was either an incredibly serious breach of security protocols, or Kane had authority and clearance levels that were far above what his visible rank suggested. "The central symbol," Kane said, gesturing vaguely toward Rachel without looking directly at her, "represents completion of the Advanced Reconnaissance and Infiltration course at a facility that doesn't officially exist. The surrounding patterns indicate specific specializations and mission completions. Each element is earned through actions that the recipients are legally prohibited from discussing, even with their closest family members." Martinez's face had gone pale as the implications of Kane's words sank in. He was beginning to understand that his mockery of Rachel's tattoo wasn't just inappropriate workplace harassment. It was an insult directed at someone who had earned recognition through means that he couldn't even imagine. "The geometric patterns you dismissed as comic book artwork," Kane continued relentlessly, "represent successful completion of missions in hostile territory. The kind of missions where failure means death and success means that thousands of other people get to continue living their normal lives without ever knowing how close they came to disaster." Rachel felt exposed and vulnerable as Kane continued his explanation. The Shadow Company's program had been designed to create soldiers who could operate invisibly, blending into any environment while carrying out missions that required the highest levels of skill and discretion. The fact that Kane was revealing this information suggested that either the program had been officially acknowledged, which seemed unlikely, or Kane was operating under authorities that superseded normal classification protocols. "So, when you mock Specialist Torres's tattoo," Kane said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "you're not just making fun of someone's personal choice in body art. You're insulting a combat veteran who has risked her life in service to this country in ways that you cannot comprehend and will never be authorized to know about." The silence in the hangar was deafening. Other mechanics who had been watching from a distance began to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine inspection or disciplinary action. Several of them looked at Rachel with new eyes, trying to reconcile the quiet mechanic they thought they knew with the person Kane was describing. Carson and Webb had moved closer during Kane's explanation, drawn by curiosity despite their growing sense that they had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. Their earlier mockery of Rachel's tattoo now seemed not just cruel, but dangerously ignorant. Kane turned his attention back to Rachel, his expression softening slightly. "Specialist Torres, I apologize for the security breach, but I felt it was necessary under the circumstances. Your service record speaks for itself, and you deserve to work in an environment where you're treated with the respect you've earned." Rachel nodded, still too shocked to speak. The revelation of her background was both vindication and vulnerability, protecting her from future harassment while potentially exposing her to new forms of unwanted attention. "Corporal Martinez," Kane said, turning back to the now thoroughly chastened young man, "I trust that you and your friends will find more productive ways to spend your time than commenting on the personal appearance of superior soldiers. Specialist. Torres has forgotten more about military operations than you'll learn in your entire career, and I expect her to be treated accordingly." Martinez nodded vigorously, his earlier swagger completely evaporated. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." Kane looked around the hangar, making eye contact with several of the other mechanics who had been watching the exchange. "I trust that everyone here understands the sensitive nature of what you've just heard. The information I've shared is classified, and discussing it outside this immediate group would constitute a serious security violation." Heads nodded throughout the hangar as people processed both the warning and the implications of what they had learned. Rachel could see the shift in how her colleagues were looking at her, the mockery and dismissiveness replaced by curiosity, and in some cases, something approaching awe. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez stepped forward, her expression serious but supportive. "Sir, you can count on our discretion. We all understand the importance of operational security." Kane nodded approvingly. "I'm sure you do, Staff Sergeant. Now, I believe Specialist Torres was in the middle of diagnosing an engine problem when we were interrupted. Perhaps we should let her get back to that important work." As the crowd began to disperse, Kane lingered near Rachel's work area. The intensity of the previous few minutes was beginning to fade, replaced by a more normal working atmosphere, though Rachel could feel the weight of changed perceptions around her. "Sir," Rachel said quietly, "may I ask how you knew about the tattoo? I mean, how you recognized it?" Kane smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and Rachel caught a glimpse of the person behind the colonel's stern exterior. "I have one too, Specialist. Different unit, different time period, but the same program. I recognized the artwork immediately." Rachel nodded, understanding flooding through her. Kane wasn't just a senior officer who happened to know about classified programs. He was a fellow operator who had walked the same dangerous path she had. The salute he had offered wasn't just military courtesy. It was recognition between equals who had shared experiences that couldn't be discussed with outsiders. The transformation in Rachel's daily experience at Fort Meridian would be immediate and profound. But more importantly, Kane's intervention had restored something that had been taken from her during those months of harassment: sense of professional dignity and the recognition that her service, however classified, had value and meaning. The mockery was over. The real recognition was just beginning. The immediate aftermath of Kane's revelation created a strange new atmosphere in Hangar 7. As Rachel returned to her work on the engine problem, she could feel the weight of changed perceptions around her. Conversations resumed, but they carried a different quality, now more respectful, more cautious, and tinged with curiosity that people were clearly struggling to contain. Martinez approached her work area hesitantly, his earlier confidence completely absent. The swagger that had defined his interactions with Rachel for months had evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Specialist Torres," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to apologize for my behavior. I had no idea about your background or what your tattoo represented. It was completely inappropriate, and it won't happen again." Rachel looked at him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in his expression, rather than the calculated charm she might have expected. The young corporal seemed to finally understand that his months of harassment hadn't been directed at an easy target, but at someone whose service record made his own accomplishments seem insignificant by comparison. "Apology accepted, Corporal," Rachel replied evenly. "We all make mistakes when we don't have complete information." Carson and Webb offered similar apologies, their embarrassment obvious as they struggled to find appropriate words. Rachel accepted their contrition graciously, understanding that they were young soldiers who had simply made poor choices based on incomplete understanding. The situation had been a learning experience for everyone involved, though the lessons had been harsh ones. As the afternoon progressed, Rachel found herself fielding questions from colleagues who were curious about her background, but respectful enough not to push for information they weren't entitled to have. The inquiries were professional and thoughtful, focusing on her technical expertise and experience with different aircraft systems rather than attempting to probe into classified details. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez was particularly supportive, making it clear that Rachel's technical skills had always been evident to anyone paying attention. "I have to admit," Gonzalez said during a brief conversation, "I suspected there was more to your story than what appeared in your visible service record. The way you approach complex problems, your familiarity with systems that aren't normally covered in standard maintenance training. It all made sense once Colonel Kane explained the situation." Rachel appreciated Gonzalez's insight and professionalism. The staff sergeant had clearly been observant enough to notice details that the younger mechanics had missed entirely, and her continued support helped ease Rachel's transition into this new dynamic within the hangar. The engine problem that had started the day remained unsolved, but Rachel approached it with renewed focus and confidence. Kane's suggestion about the secondary fuel system pressure regulators proved to be correct, and she was able to identify and replace a faulty component that had been causing the intermittent power fluctuations. As she completed the repair and began reassembling the engine compartment, Rachel reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed in the course of a single day. The morning had started with the same pattern of harassment and isolation she had been enduring for months. By evening, she was walking out of the hangar with her head held high and her background acknowledged, if not fully understood, by her colleagues. The next few days brought a noticeable shift in the social dynamics of Hangar 7. Martinez and his friends maintained a respectful distance while still participating in normal work-related interactions. Their behavior was professional and appropriate, suggesting that Kane's intervention had achieved its intended effect without creating lasting animosity or resentment. Other mechanics were more openly curious about Rachel's background, asking thoughtful questions about her experience with different aircraft systems and seeking her input on technical challenges. The conversations were respectful and focused on professional topics, avoiding any attempts to probe into classified information. Rachel found herself taking on a more prominent role in training newer mechanics and sharing her expertise with colleagues who were facing particularly challenging repairs. The increased responsibility and visibility were welcome changes from the isolation she had experienced previously. One afternoon, about a week after Kane's visit, Rachel was working on a complex avionics problem when she noticed Martinez watching her from across the hangar. Instead of the hostile stare she had grown accustomed to, his expression showed genuine interest in her technical approach. When she finished the repair, Martinez approached with a question about diagnostic procedures that was clearly motivated by a desire to learn rather than to criticize. Rachel found herself enjoying the teaching role, sharing insights and techniques that drew on her diverse experience with aircraft systems. "I've been thinking about what Colonel Kane said," Martinez told her during their conversation, "about different types of military service and how much I don't understand about the bigger picture. I realize I've been pretty naive about a lot of things." Rachel nodded, seeing genuine growth in the young corporal's attitude. "We all start somewhere, Jake. The important thing is being open to learning and growing. Your technical skills are solid. You just needed to develop some perspective on the human side of military service." The conversation with Martinez led to similar discussions with Carson and Webb, who were also beginning to develop a more mature understanding of military service and the complexities involved in building successful careers. Rachel found satisfaction in helping guide their professional development, understanding that her own difficult experiences could serve as valuable lessons for others. But even as her immediate situation improved, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Kane's public revelation of her background would have consequences beyond the walls of Hangar 7. Information had a way of spreading in military communities, and she wondered what new challenges or opportunities might arise from having her classified service become known, even in limited circles. The answer to that question would come sooner than she expected, and it would bring possibilities she hadn't considered since transitioning away from special operations work. 3 weeks after Kane's intervention, Rachel received an unexpected visitor during her lunch break. She was sitting outside the hangar, enjoying a rare moment of solitude while eating a sandwich when a black sedan pulled up nearby. The vehicle had the understated but unmistakable characteristics of official government transportation-tinted windows and communications equipment that marked it as something more significant than a typical military staff car. The driver remained in the vehicle while a woman in civilian clothes approached Rachel's position. She appeared to be in her 40s, with short auburn hair and the kind of purposeful stride that suggested military training despite her business attire. Her clothing was expensive but conservative, the type of professional wardrobe worn by people who moved in circles where appearance and credibility were equally important. "Specialist Torres?" the woman asked as she approached, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer to her question. Rachel set down her sandwich and came to attention, uncertain about the appropriate protocol for dealing with what appeared to be a civilian official. "Yes, ma'am. Please remain at ease," the woman said with a slight smile. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Defense. I was hoping we could have a brief conversation about your current assignment and some potential opportunities that might interest you." Rachel felt a familiar mixture of curiosity and caution that came from years of navigating classified environments where straightforward questions often had complex answers. "Of course, ma'am. What can I do for you?" Walsh gestured toward a nearby picnic table, suggesting they sit down for their conversation. As they settled across from each other, Rachel noticed that Walsh's eyes had the same calculating quality she had seen in Kane's gaze, the look of someone accustomed to assessing threats and opportunities simultaneously. "I understand you had an interesting encounter with Colonel Kane a few weeks ago," Walsh began, her tone carefully neutral. "His report of the incident crossed my desk, and it raised some questions about your current utilization and future career trajectory." Rachel remained silent, waiting for Walsh to provide more context about her visit and its purpose. Years of operating in classified environments had taught her the value of listening carefully before responding, especially when dealing with officials whose authority and objectives weren't immediately clear. "Your service record makes for fascinating reading," Walsh continued. "At least the portions that people with my clearance level are authorized to see. Your technical skills are exceptional, your operational experience is extensive, and your psychological profiles indicate someone who adapts well to changing circumstances and complex challenges." Rachel began to understand that this conversation was heading towards some kind of job offer or assignment change, though the specific nature of the opportunity remained unclear. Walsh's presence suggested involvement from higher levels of the defense establishment than would normally take interest in a maintenance specialist's career path. "The incident with Colonel Kane demonstrated something important," Walsh explained. "It showed that your background and capabilities are being wasted in your current assignment. You're performing valuable work, certainly, but aircraft maintenance doesn't fully utilize the skill set that the government invested considerable time and resources in developing." Rachel felt conflicted about Walsh's assessment. While she appreciated the recognition of her capabilities, she had found genuine satisfaction in her maintenance work and had been building positive relationships with her colleagues. The prospect of another major change, especially one that might involve returning to classified operations, was both exciting and concerning. "What kind of opportunity are you referring to, ma'am?" Rachel asked, deciding that direct questions might be more productive than continued speculation. Walsh reached into a briefcase and withdrew a manila folder marked with classification stamps and security warnings. "There's a new program being developed that combines technical expertise with operational experience in ways that traditional military structures haven't attempted before. It's still in the planning stages, but the concept involves small teams of specialists who can deploy rapidly to provide both technical support and security capabilities in complex environments." Rachel recognized the general description as similar to programs she had encountered during her previous assignments, though the specific focus on technical skills suggested some evolution in mission requirements and operational concepts. The teams would operate primarily in civilian environments, Walsh continued, providing technical consulting and support services while maintaining the capability to respond to security threats or operational challenges. Think of it as a hybrid between traditional special operations and specialized contractor services. Rachel could see the appeal of such a program from both military and political perspectives. It would provide flexibility for operations that require technical expertise combined with security capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability for activities that might be diplomatically or politically sensitive. "Your background makes you an ideal candidate for this type of work," Walsh explained. "You have the technical skills to solve complex problems in unfamiliar environments, the operational experience to handle security challenges, and the psychological profile to work effectively in ambiguous situations where mission parameters might change rapidly." Rachel considered the implications of what Walsh was describing. The work would likely be challenging and interesting, utilizing skills that her current assignment didn't fully engage. However, it would also mean returning to the world of classified operations and uncertain deployments that she had deliberately moved away from. "I appreciate the opportunity, ma'am," Rachel said carefully, "but I'd need to understand more about the specific requirements and expectations before making any commitments. My current assignment has been fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated." Walsh nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thoughtful response we'd expect from someone with your background. Hasty decisions based on incomplete information tend to lead to poor outcomes in our line of work. She handed Rachel the manila folder, which was sealed with tape and marked with warnings about proper handling and storage of classified materials. This contains a more detailed briefing about the program, including mission profiles, compensation structures, and deployment expectations. You'll need to review it in a secure facility, of course. Rachel accepted the folder, feeling its weight as both a physical object and a symbol of potential life changes. The decision to even read the materials inside represented a step toward re-engaging with aspects of her career that she had been content to leave behind. Take your time with the decision, Walsh advised. The program won't be fully operational for several months, so there's no immediate pressure to commit. However, if you decide to participate, the selection and training process would begin within the next few weeks. Rachel thanked Walsh for the opportunity and watched as the official returned to her vehicle and departed. The brief encounter had introduced new possibilities and complications into what had been becoming a comfortable routine at Fort Meridian. That evening, Rachel visited the base's secure communications facility to review the contents of Walsh's folder. The briefing materials were comprehensive and detailed, describing a program that was indeed innovative in its combination of technical and operational capabilities. The proposed teams would consist of 3 to 5 specialists, each with complementary skills in areas such as communications, electronics, mechanical systems, and security operations. They would deploy to locations around the world where American interests had required technical support combined with security awareness, operating undercover identities that provided legitimate reasons for their presence. The mission profiles ranged from straightforward technical consulting to complex operations involving infrastructure assessment, communication security, and electronic surveillance. Team members would be expected to maintain civilian cover identities, while remaining prepared to respond to security threats or operational requirements. Rachel found herself both intrigued and concerned by what she read. The work would certainly be more engaging than routine aircraft maintenance, and the compensation was significantly higher than her current pay grade. However, it would also mean returning to a lifestyle of uncertain schedules, classified communications, and the constant awareness that came with operating in potentially hostile environments. Over the following days, Rachel found herself thinking frequently about Walsh's offer and the materials in the classified briefing. She discussed her career options in general terms with Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, who provided valuable perspective about the benefits and drawbacks of different types of military service. The question you need to ask yourself, Gonzalez advised during one of their conversations, is whether you're ready to go back to that level of operational intensity. You've clearly been successful in that environment before, but sometimes it's worth considering whether a good thing should be left in the past. Rachel appreciated Gonzalez's insight, particularly since it came from someone who understood both the appeal and the costs of challenging military assignments. The staff sergeant had clearly recognized that Rachel was considering some kind of career change, even without knowing the specific details. On the other hand, Gonzalez continued, you're young enough that you could do another tour in special operations and still have time for a different kind of career afterward. Some opportunities don't come around twice, and you might regret not taking advantage of your capabilities while you have them. Rachel realized that her decision would ultimately come down to personal values and priorities that only she could determine. The technical skills and operational experience that made her valuable to programs like the one Walsh had described were also assets that could be applied in many other contexts. The turning point came during an unexpected encounter that would help clarify her thinking in ways she hadn't anticipated. A week after receiving Walsh's folder, Rachel was working on a particularly complex avionics problem when she received word that Colonel Kane had returned to Fort Meridian for another inspection. She felt a mixture of anticipation and curiosity about seeing him again, wondering whether he was aware of Walsh's visit and the opportunities it had presented. Kane found her in the same hangar where their first encounter had taken place, though. The atmosphere was dramatically different from that confrontational day 3 weeks earlier. Rachel was working collaboratively with 2 other mechanics on a navigation system calibration, and the conversation was professional and respectful throughout. "Specialist Torres," Kane said as he approached her work area. "I hope you don't mind if I observe your work for a few minutes. I'm interested in seeing how you approach complex technical problems." Rachel welcomed Kane's attention, understanding that his interest was both professional and personal. As she explained the navigation system problem and her diagnostic approach, Kane asked informed questions that demonstrated his continued engagement with technical issues despite his senior rank. "I understand you've had some interesting conversations recently," Kane said quietly during a break in the technical discussion. "Jennifer Walsh is someone whose judgment I trust completely, and her recommendations carry considerable weight in certain circles." Rachel wasn't surprised that Kane knew about Walsh's visit, given the interconnected nature of the special operations community and the classified programs they supported. "Yes, sir. I'm still considering the opportunity she described." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "It's a significant decision, and not one that should be made lightly. The work she's describing would put your skills to excellent use, but it would also mean returning to a lifestyle that has both rewards and costs." Rachel appreciated Kane's balanced perspective on the opportunity. His experience in similar programs gave him credibility when discussing the realities of special operations work that civilian officials might not fully convey. "If you decide to pursue the opportunity," Kane continued, "you should know that you'll have my complete support and recommendation. Your capabilities and character make you exactly the kind of person these programs need to be successful." The endorsement was meaningful, coming from someone whose opinion clearly carried weight in the defense establishment. Rachel thanked Kane for his support while acknowledging that she was still working through the decision-making process. As Kane continued his inspection of the hangar, Rachel reflected on how much his situation had changed since his first visit. The respect and recognition she now enjoyed from her colleagues had restored her confidence and sense of professional identity, making it easier to consider new challenges and opportunities. Later that day, Martinez approached her work area with a question that surprised her with its maturity and thoughtfulness. "Specialist Torres, I wanted to ask you about something if you don't mind," he said, his demeanor showing the continued evolution in his attitude since Kane's intervention. Rachel looked up from the navigation system, curious about what Martinez wanted to discuss. Their interactions had been professional but limited since the incident with Kane, and she was interested in seeing how their relationship might continue to develop. "I've been thinking about what Colonel Kane said about different types of military service," Martinez explained. "I'm starting to realize that there's a lot about the military that I don't understand, and I was wondering if you might be willing to share some insights about career development and professional growth." Rachel was touched by Martinez's request, seeing it as evidence of genuine personal growth rather than simple damage control after his earlier mistakes. The young corporal seemed to be developing a more mature understanding of military service and the complexities involved in building a successful career. "Of course," Rachel replied. "What specific aspects are you interested in discussing?" Martinez's questions revealed someone who was beginning to think seriously about his future in the military and the skills he would need to develop to be successful. Rachel found herself enjoying the mentoring role, drawing on her diverse experiences to provide practical advice about professional development and career planning. Their conversation attracted the attention of Carson and Webb, who joined the discussion with their own questions about military careers and advancement opportunities. Rachel realized that Kane's intervention had not only changed how she was perceived, but it also created opportunities for her to contribute to the professional development of junior personnel. The discussions with the younger mechanics helped Rachel clarify her own thinking about the opportunity Walsh had presented. She found satisfaction in sharing knowledge and helping others develop their capabilities. But she also missed the intellectual challenges and operational complexity of her previous assignments. That evening, Rachel returned to the secure communications facility to review Walsh's materials one final time before making her decision. As she read through the mission profiles and program requirements, she realized that her heart rate had increased and her attention had sharpened in ways that reminded her why she had been drawn to special operations work originally. The following morning, Rachel contacted Walsh's office and requested a follow-up meeting to discuss the opportunity in more detail. The response was prompt and professional, with arrangements made for Walsh to return to Fort Meridian within 2 days for a more comprehensive briefing. During the intervening time, Rachel completed her work assignments with characteristic thoroughness while mentally preparing for what might be her final weeks in aircraft maintenance. She found herself paying closer attention to the details of her current work, wanting to ensure that any transition would leave her colleagues and the maintenance operation in good condition. Walsh's return visit was more comprehensive than their initial meeting, involving detailed discussions about mission requirements, training expectations, and the personal commitments involved in the new program. Rachel asked pointed questions about operational security, mission duration, and support structures, drawing on her previous experience to identify potential challenges and concerns. Your questions demonstrate exactly the kind of analytical thinking we need in this program, Walsh observed. Too many people focus on the exciting aspects of the work without adequately considering the practical challenges and support requirements. Rachel appreciated Walsh's straightforward approach to discussing both the opportunities and the difficulties involved in the proposed assignment. The official's honesty about potential problems and limitations increased Rachel's confidence in the program's leadership and planning. After extensive discussion, Rachel made her decision. The combination of intellectual challenge, professional growth opportunity, and the chance to fully utilize her capabilities outweighed her satisfaction with the stability and routine of aircraft maintenance. She accepted Walsh's offer with the understanding that she would complete her current assignments at Fort Meridian before beginning the selection and training process. The decision felt right, representing a natural progression in her career that would allow her to continue serving while engaging her full range of skills and experience. The news of Rachel's impending departure created mixed reactions among her colleagues in Hangar 7. While everyone understood that she was moving on to opportunities that better matched her capabilities, there was genuine sadness about losing someone who had become a valued team member and mentor. Martinez, Carson, and Webb were particularly affected by Rachel's departure announcement. The young mechanics had come to appreciate not only her technical expertise, but also her willingness to share knowledge and provide guidance about professional development. "I want you to know," Martinez told Rachel during one of their final conversations, "that everything that happened before Colonel Kane's visit, I'm embarrassed about all of it. You've taught me more about professionalism and technical excellence in the past few weeks than I learned in my first year here." Rachel was moved by Martinez's sincerity. The transformation in his attitude had been genuine and complete, representing the kind of personal growth that made military service meaningful beyond individual career advancement. "You have good instincts and solid technical skills, Jake," Rachel replied. "You just needed to develop some perspective and maturity. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and remember that every person you work with has something valuable to teach you if you're willing to listen. Similar conversations with Carson and Webb reinforced Rachel's satisfaction with the mentoring role she had developed. The young mechanics were clearly taking her advice to heart, approaching their work with increased seriousness and their colleagues with greater respect. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez organized a small farewell gathering during Rachel's final week, bringing together the entire maintenance team for an informal celebration of her contributions to the hangar's operations. The atmosphere was warm and collegial, a stark contrast to the isolation and hostility Rachel had experienced during her early months at Fort Meridian. "You've done more than just fix aircraft," Gonzalez told the assembled group. "You've shown all of us what excellence looks like, both technically and professionally. The standards you've set will continue to influence how we operate long after you've moved on to new challenges." Rachel felt grateful for Gonzalez's leadership and support. Throughout her time at the base, the staff sergeant had consistently treated her fairly and professionally, even when others had been less welcoming, and her continued advocacy had made a significant difference in Rachel's daily experience. Colonel Kane made one final visit to Hangar 7 before Rachel's departure, ostensibly for routine inspection purposes, but clearly wanting to wish her well in her new assignment. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, with Kane expressing confidence in Rachel's success and his appreciation for her service at Fort Meridian. "You've done important work here," Kane told Rachel as they stood near the aircraft where their first encounter had taken place. "The respect you've earned from your colleagues and the contributions you've made to this operation will be remembered long after you've moved on to new challenges." Rachel felt the weight of Kane's words, understanding that her time at Fort Meridian had been about more than just aircraft maintenance. She had rebuilt her professional identity, developed new relationships, and proven that her capabilities extended far beyond her previous specialized assignments. "Sir," Rachel said, "I want to thank you for what you did that day. Your intervention changed everything for me here, and I'll never forget the respect you showed by recognizing what my service really meant." Kane smiled, the stern expression softening into something more personal. "Recognition between operators is important, specialist. We understand what each other has sacrificed in ways that others can't. Your tattoo tells a story that deserves to be honored, not mocked." Rachel's final days at Fort Meridian were busy with completing ongoing projects and transitioning her responsibilities to other team members. She documented her work procedures and diagnostic techniques, creating resources that would help her colleagues maintain the high standards she had established. The aircraft she had been working on when Kane first arrived was now running perfectly, its engine problems resolved through the systematic approach that had become her trademark. As she performed her final inspection of the repair work, Rachel reflected on how much both she and the hangar had changed since that confrontational day months earlier. Martinez, Carson, and Webb approached her work area on her final afternoon, carrying a small package wrapped in military-issue brown paper. "We wanted to give you something to remember us by," Carson said, his usual nervousness replaced by genuine warmth. "It's not much, but we thought you might like it." Rachel unwrapped the package to find a small metal plaque engraved with the words "Excellence in Service" and the dates of her assignment to Fort Meridian. Below that, in smaller text, were the signatures of everyone who worked in Hangar 7. "We had it made at the base machine shop," Webb explained. "Staff Sergeant Gonzalez helped us with the design. We wanted something that would remind you that your time here mattered to all of us." Rachel felt a surge of emotion as she examined the plaque, seeing the names of colleagues who had become friends and the dates that marked a transformative period in her career. The gesture was simple but meaningful, representing acceptance and respect that had been hard-won through months of professional excellence and personal integrity. "Thank you," Rachel said, her voice catching slightly. "This means more to me than you know. I'll treasure it always." As Rachel packed her personal belongings and prepared to leave Fort Meridian for the final time, she carried with her more than just memories of technical challenges and professional achievements. She had rediscovered her sense of pride in service, rebuilt relationships with colleagues, and proven to herself that respect, once earned, created foundations for continued success. The tattoo on her back, which had been a source of mockery and isolation when she first arrived, had become a symbol of earned recognition and hidden depths. The symbols that had once been misunderstood were now acknowledged as markers of service and sacrifice that commanded appropriate respect from those who truly understood their meaning. Her departure from Fort Meridian represented the end of one chapter and the beginning of another in a career that had already taken her through challenges and opportunities that most people would never experience. The woman who drove away from Hangar 7 was different from the one who had arrived 8 months earlier, strengthened by adversity and empowered by recognition. The new program would bring fresh challenges in unfamiliar environments, but Rachel approached them with confidence, born from experience and success. Her tattoo would continue to serve as both personal reminder and professional credential, connecting her past achievements with future opportunities in service to objectives larger than individual recognition or glory. 6 months later, Rachel found herself in a small cafe in Prague, Czech Republic, reviewing technical specifications for a communication system that officially didn't exist. She was operating under the cover identity of a freelance telecommunications consultant, complete with business cards, references, and a carefully constructed professional history that would withstand casual scrutiny. Her team consisted of 4 other specialists, each with their own cover identities and areas of expertise. They had been deployed to assess and potentially upgrade security systems for a series of facilities that housed sensitive research operations. The work was exactly what Walsh had described: technically challenging, operationally complex, and requiring constant awareness of security considerations. Rachel's tablet displayed encrypted messages from her team members reporting on their individual assignments and coordinating their activities for the following day. The communications were routed through multiple servers and protected by encryption systems that would take years to break. But to anyone watching, she appeared to be simply reviewing business emails over her morning coffee. The transformation in her daily routine had been dramatic. Instead of the predictable schedule of aircraft maintenance, she now operated in a world where plans changed rapidly based on intelligence reports and threat assessments. Instead of working in the controlled environment of a military hangar, she found herself in foreign cities where every interaction carried potential risks and opportunities. But the core elements that had made her successful at Fort Meridian remained relevant in this new environment. Her technical expertise allowed her to quickly understand and work with unfamiliar systems. Her attention to detail helped her maintain operational security while accomplishing complex objectives. And her ability to work effectively with diverse teams had proven invaluable in coordinating with specialists from different backgrounds and cultures. The compensation was indeed significantly higher than her military pay grade, and the work provided intellectual challenges that fully engaged her capabilities. However, she had also discovered that Walsh's warnings about the lifestyle costs had been accurate. The constant travel and operational security requirements made it difficult to maintain normal relationships or establish routines outside of work. As Rachel finished her coffee and prepared to leave the cafe, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The mockery and isolation she had experienced during her early months at Fort Meridian seemed like events from another lifetime, though she recognized their importance in helping her develop resilience and self-confidence. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Walsh. reporting that another operator had requested information about Rachel's background and capabilities. The inquiry had come from a program that was developing new approaches to technical intelligence gathering, and they were specifically looking for someone with Rachel's combination of skills and experience. Rachel smiled as she read the message, understanding that her reputation within the special operations community was growing based on her performance in the current program. The recognition that had been publicly denied for so many years was now flowing freely within the circles that mattered most for her career development. She composed a brief response indicating her interest in learning more about the opportunity, while noting that she was committed to completing her current assignment before considering any transitions. The professionalism and reliability that had impressed her colleagues at Fort Meridian continued to serve her well in this more complex environment. As she walked through the streets of Prague toward her next appointment, Rachel thought about Martinez, Carson, and Webb, wondering how their careers were developing and whether they had continued to grow professionally. She hoped that the lessons they had learned during her time at Fort Meridian were serving them well in their own assignments. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had sent occasional updates about operations in Hangar 7, reporting that the maintenance standards Rachel had established were being maintained and that the younger mechanics were developing into competent professionals. The news was gratifying, confirming that her contributions had created lasting positive changes beyond her individual service. Colonel Kane had also stayed in touch through occasional encrypted communications, sharing updates about other operators and programs while expressing continued satisfaction with Rachel's career progression. His recognition and support had been instrumental in opening doors to opportunities like the one she was currently pursuing. The plaque that Martinez, Carson, and Webb had given her during her departure from Fort Meridian now sat on the desk in her apartment, serving as a reminder of the importance of earning respect through consistent excellence rather than demanding it based on rank or credentials. The lesson had proven valuable in her current work, where success depended on building trust and credibility with people who had no obligation to accept her authority. Rachel's tattoo continued to serve its original purpose as a recognition signal for other operators, though she now encountered it more frequently in her work environment. During a recent assignment in Berlin, she had identified 2 other team members from different agencies simply by recognizing partially visible tattoo elements during a coordination meeting. The silent acknowledgement that followed that created instant trust and understanding that facilitated their collaboration. But the tattoo had also taken on additional meaning since her experience at Fort Meridian. It now represented not just her classified service record, but also her ability to overcome adversity and earn recognition through professional excellence. The symbols that had once been sources of mockery were now sources of pride and connection to a community of professionals who understood their true significance. As Rachel approached the building where her next meeting would take place, she considered the path that had led her from the isolation and harassment of her early months at Fort Meridian to the challenging and rewarding work she was now performing. The journey had required resilience, professional excellence, and the support of people like Kane and Gonzalez, who had recognized her capabilities even when others had failed to do so. The program Walsh had recruited her for was scheduled to continue for at least another year, with possible extensions based on operational requirements and funding availability. Rachel looked forward to the continued challenges and opportunities, understanding that her unique combination of technical skills and operational experience would remain valuable for as long as she chose to apply them. But she also carried with her the knowledge that respect, once truly earned, created foundations for success in any environment. The principles that had eventually won over her colleagues at Fort Meridian: consistent excellence, professional integrity, and willingness to help others develop their capabilities would continue to serve her well regardless of where her career might lead. The mockery was now just a memory, replaced by recognition and respect that had opened doors she couldn't have imagined during those difficult early months at Fort Meridian. Her tattoo told the same story it always had, but now that story was being read by people who understood its true meaning and significance. As Rachel entered the building for her appointment, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had overcome adversity and proven her worth through actions rather than words. The shadows she had once operated in were no longer places of isolation, but honored ground where sacrifices had been made and recognition had been earned through service to objectives larger than individual glory. The symbols on her back would continue to tell their story, connecting her past achievements with future opportunities in ways that those three young mechanics could never have imagined when they first began their cruel commentary months earlier. But their evolution from tormentors to admirers had taught Rachel something equally valuable about the power of persistent excellence to transform even the most hostile environments into places of mutual respect and shared purpose. The tattoo that had once been mocked was now a badge of honor, recognized by those who mattered most and serving as a bridge between past service and future opportunities. And Rachel Torres, the woman who had endured months of harassment while quietly excelling at her duties, had become exactly what she had always been, a professional whose capabilities spoke louder than any words of recognition ever could. But the most profound validation came 3 years later, in a way Rachel never could have anticipated. She was between assignments, visiting her parents in California, when she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, though older and more uncertain than she remembered. "Specialist Torres? I mean, ma'am?" "This is Jake Martinez. I hope you remember me from Fort Meridian." Rachel smiled, settling into a comfortable chair on her parents' patio. "Of course I remember you, Jake. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, ma'am." "Really well, actually. I'm calling because I wanted to thank you and to tell you something that I think you'd want to know." Martinez's voice carried a maturity that hadn't been there during their time together at Fort Meridian. He explained that he had been promoted to staff sergeant and was now serving as a crew chief on a special operations aviation unit. His technical skills and leadership abilities had caught the attention of senior commanders, leading to opportunities he never could have imagined during his early days as a young corporal. "But that's not why I'm calling," Martinez continued. "Last week, I was working on a helicopter that had been damaged during a mission I can't really talk about. The crew chief from another unit came over to help, and I noticed he had a tattoo on his arm that looked familiar. It was similar to yours, but smaller, and when I asked him about it, he got really quiet." Rachel felt her attention sharpen, understanding where this conversation was heading. "I told him about you," Martinez said, "about what happened with Colonel Kane, and how you taught us about respect and professionalism." He listened to the whole story, and then he told me something that made me realize how lucky we were to have worked with you. Martinez paused, and Rachel could hear the emotion in his voice when he continued. "He said that people with tattoos like yours and his represent less than 1% of all military personnel. He said that most of them never get the recognition they deserve because their service can never be publicly acknowledged. And he said that what you did for us, teaching us to be better soldiers and better people, was probably more important than any of the classified missions you had completed." Rachel felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to Martinez's words. The validation from a fellow operator, shared through the genuine gratitude of a young soldier she had helped develop, meant more to her than any official commendation ever could. "I just wanted you to know," Martinez concluded, "that your time at Fort Meridian mattered, not just because you were an excellent mechanic, but because you showed us what it means to serve with dignity and professionalism, even when people don't appreciate what you've sacrificed." After the call ended, Rachel sat quietly on the patio, watching the sunset and reflecting on the unexpected ways that service and sacrifice could create ripple effects across time and distance. The harassment she had endured, the recognition she had received from Kane, and the mentoring she had provided to young soldiers had all contributed to a legacy that extended far beyond her individual career. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an encrypted number. It was from Kane, now retired but still connected to the special operations community through consulting work and advisory positions. "I heard about your conversation with Martinez. Thought you should know that the young crew chief he mentioned reached out to me afterward. Turns out he's been struggling with some of the same issues you faced early in your career. I gave him your contact information with your permission assumed. Sometimes the best support comes from people who have walked the same path." Rachel typed back a simple response. "Always happy to help a fellow operator. Thanks for connecting." U.S. As she prepared to return to her current assignment the following week, Rachel understood that her journey from the mockery in Hangar 7 to recognition and respect had been about more than just her personal vindication. It had been about demonstrating that excellence and integrity could overcome prejudice and ignorance, creating positive change that extended far beyond any individual situation. The symbols on her back would continue to tell their story to those who knew how to read them. But now those symbols also represented something additional: the power of mentorship, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the enduring value of treating all people with the respect their service deserves. Years later, when military historians would study the evolution of special operations forces and the challenges faced by transitioning operators, they might note the small but significant changes in how classified service members were treated. Within the broader military community, they probably wouldn't know about Rachel Torres or Jake Martinez, or the confrontation in Hangar 7 that helped spark those changes. But the ripple effects would continue, spreading through training programs and leadership development courses, carried forward by soldiers who had learned that true professionalism means recognizing excellence wherever you find it, regardless of whether you understand the full story behind it. The tattoo that had once been a source of shame and mockery had become a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the most profound victories are the ones that create better conditions for the people who come after you. And in the end, that might be the most meaningful service of all, ensuring that future generations of operators would face fewer challenges and receive more recognition for their sacrifices in defense of freedom and security. Rachel's story had come full circle, but its impact would continue to radiate outward, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways she might never fully know. The shadows she had operated in were no longer places of isolation, but foundations upon which others could build their own legacies of service and sacrifice. The mockery had ended. The recognition had come. But the real victory was in the lives changed and the future made better for those who would follow in her footsteps. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.